Okay, class, we're going to continue on in our Excel assignment. So our next step in the Excel assignment is to look at 3 different cities you might want to live in and do a comparison that goes back to that Venn diagram of happiness. In the comparison, you're going to look at money and the fact of how much you can make there and how much it costs to live there. So salary and cost of living is money. And then we're going to look at work and happiness and try to put numbers on work and happiness, which is a little hard to do, but we'll just talk through it in determining what we're going to put numerically in this assignment. And when you do this in real life, it might be more factors that you put into those numbers. But we're going to show you how to go through here, and I want you to just do this first analysis as if you were trying to figure out 3 cities to live in and 3 jobs to consider, and do an analysis using Excel in that. So I'm going to start here, and this is where we left our spreadsheet that you're going to turn in for this next assignment. And you left it here with entry-level position in your field in Gainesville, with a budget and a pie chart of that budget. And what we're going to do from there is do a new tab in here and look at salary and cost of living and happiness and work, and do a different pool of data on another tab in here. So the first thing I want you to do is, on the same Excel spreadsheet, you're going to open up a new sheet over here. So you're going to do this little insert sheet to make a second sheet. And I want you to name that sheet. So you double click it, and we're going to do salary and cost. Salary and cost, work, happiness. Okay, so name that sheet salary and cost, comma work, comma happiness, as the name of that new sheet you're opening up. And on this sheet, we're going to start looking at some comparisons. I'm going to make this a little bigger so it shows up better on video for you guys. Just zooming in there. And I want you to pick 3 cities that you want to live in. These are not necessarily Gainesville. Pick 3 other cities, or it could be Gainesville if you really want to live there, where you would potentially start your career. And the way to do this is really think about that Venn diagram of happiness. Do you want to live in a city near your family? Do you know a certain company you really want to work for? Remember that work aspect. You might have to do a little research on this before you do this spreadsheet, knowing 3 potential cities are this, this, and this, because this company's in city A, this company's in city B, I like this kind of job. This company's in city C, and they're okay. So do a little time, do a little Google research, look at 3 cities you potentially want to live in. For this assignment, let's do them as U.S. cities, because the comparator we're going to use is for the United States. And think about what job you'd want to work in those cities, what particular company you might want to work for, because you're going to have to quantify how much you might like that work. It's going to be hard to do at this point without specific interviews and job offers to talk about, but do your best educated guess of 3 cities you might want to start your career in, and why you might pick those for happiness factor. So first come up with those 3 cities and then write them down. So for this, I'm going to just put 3 cities. I'm going to do Boston, we're going to do Miami, and we're going to do Tampa. And I'm just doing this as an example for my spreadsheet. Use the cities that are important to you. I don't want to see everyone with Boston, Miami, and Tampa, okay? Do your own research on this one. And we're going to make a little spreadsheet in here comparing items in these 3 cities. The first thing we're going to look at is starting salary. So starting salary. And then I'm going to double click right here to make it the width of those words. So starting salary in those 3 cities for your position. We went through how to do this in the last video when you had to find it for Gainesville. So you're going to go back to that same website, we'll get to this one in a minute, that's off the UF Career Resource Salary Negotiation page. You're going to open up this NACE Salary Calculator Center, the same one you did for Gainesville, and do the same thing for those 3 cities that you're writing in there. So I'll just show you one of them, and then I've already done this. I'm going to bring the numbers over like the cake that's already done in the oven on the cooking show, and bring them over for you. But I'll go through this quickly again for one for you. So I guess my first one was Boston. So let's look at Massachusetts, and we'll pick Boston. And then for me it was mechanical engineer. Then we'll pretend I'm starting out, so less than 1 year. So do the same thing as the starting salary, and I pretend I had a bachelor's degree. And where you last attended school was Florida. And I graduated from SDU. There we go. What was my major? It was in engineering. How relevant? My degree is in my field. What was my GPA? Between a 3.5 and a 3.9. I'm going to submit the query. And remember what I said to do with the Gainesville one is take that lowest number, that first 10th percentile. So in Boston, the expected starting salary in that first 10th percentile, the first people coming out, is $60,650. So go back to your spreadsheet. I'm going to put in $60,650. And again, remember, we want to do this as dollars. I'm going to change this whole column to dollars. And then I want you to do the same thing for 2 other cities. Your field, starting salary less than a year. And I'm just going to put the numbers in here for what they were. So for Miami, it was $35,330. And for Tampa, it was $47,240 when I did that analysis. So go through each city, run through that, and put what that starting salary is in there. So starting salary is one thing. But for money, it's not just salary, it's also cost of living factor. So I want to show you where to look at comparable costs of living. So we'll do cost of living. It's the right size. And to do this, you have to have a number. The website I'm going to show you, and I'll put the link in the Canvas syllabus, you have to have a cost of living to start with to then compare. And this is the reason I had you do the Gainesville thing on the spreadsheet. So what I'll show you is if you go back here to the other tab, your Gainesville entry level tab, take this number, whatever your starting salary was in Gainesville for your position, and we're going to use that number to then compare cost of living in other cities. So we're going to just assume in Gainesville, your cost of living is going to equal your salary. It's not quite an accurate assumption, but we got to start somewhere for this spreadsheet. So take that number, for this case of what I did was $54,350, and we're going to pretend that's our cost of living in Gainesville, and then do a comparison of cost of living in other cities. Let's go back to this tab. So we're going to find our cost of living in the 3 other cities you selected, and we're going to use this website that's a cost of living calculator off of Bankrate. The reason I chose this is it was linked off of a U.S. federal website as a good one to use for cost of living comparison. So I'll put the link to this website in the Canvas page so you can find it. But what you do is say, I'm moving from city A to city B. In city A, I make so much money. And this is why we did that first page of the spreadsheet. 1, so you can learn how to make a budget, but 2, so we have a number for this. So we're going to start with our Gainesville number, C, D, E, F, G. And my first one was Boston. So I'm going to say if I could live off of so much money in Gainesville, how much would it cost for me to live in Boston? And remember that I need to know what that Gainesville starting number was. I'm going to take that $54,350. So $54,350. And I'm going to look at from Gainesville to Boston, if it cost $54,350 to live in Gainesville, how much would it cost to live in Boston? And hit refresh listing. Let it do its magic. All right, it did its magic. So from Gainesville to Boston, I would need $77,618.59 of salary to live equivalently in Boston as I would for $54,350 in Gainesville. This is not an exact science, but this website does a decent job, and just something for your own interest that they break out is what exactly the costs are that are the difference and where the categories are. So home price difference is a big one of cost of living Gainesville to Boston, which could also look at rent. So $875 of rent in Gainesville goes up to a little over $2,000 of rent in Boston. And I'll show you the categories where things are higher and where things are lower. doctor visits, vet services, phone, dry cleaning, beer, wine, pizza, potato chips. So it does entities that are common entities that you can kind of get a feel, city A to city B, where the cost of living differences are. So what I want you to do is take this number, this $77,618, and put it into the spreadsheet. I'm going to drop the cents on it just to make life easy. So we're going to do Boston, $77,618. And again, we're going to make sure this is shown as money. So cost of living in Boston. So I took that Gainesville number, went to this website, went Gainesville to Boston based on that number that you had calculated on the first page of your spreadsheet for Gainesville, and got another number. We're going to do this again for the other cities. So the other ones were like Tampa. So Gainesville to Tampa. So if I had $54,350 in Gainesville, to go to Tampa, I'd need a little less money, actually, $51,689. So, and it shows you where the difference of cost of living is. So, it's not that much difference for rent, but there's a few things that are a little cheaper in Tampa than in Gainesville. It's a decent calculator. Nothing's going to be exact, and it'll be very regional about where you live in these cities, but it's something to start on if you have no idea of it. And it's something to start on because we need to use it for this assignment. So we're going to do that for the other two cities, and I'll just put those numbers in. So Tampa was 51,689. And then when I did the same thing for Gainesville to Miami, it was 62,502 to live in Miami. So I want you to look at starting salary and cost of living in 3 cities you potentially want to work for companies in, or you potentially want to live in for your family or other reasons. So we're going to look at that Venn diagram of happiness and look at starting salary and cost of living using this method I just showed you. So we have starting salary and we have cost of living. We need to compare these things somehow. And a way to do it, and the way we're going to do it, is sometimes the way data is looked at is in something called a non-dimensional sense. So non-dimensional means if I have dollars over dollars, those dimensions of dollars falls out. Or if I had feet over feet, it becomes a non-dimensional entity that is just a comparator number. So instead of doing something like subtracting for comparison, we're going to do a fraction that is how much you make over how much it costs to live. So we're going to do salary over cost, and I'll show you a little more why later, but just bear with me that this is some way to compare items that are done commonly in data analysis, is using a non-dimensional number that you have something of the same units over something of the same units, and it just gives you a number to do a comparator of. So salary over cost, this is again where we're going to use an equation in Excel. Remember, equations start with the equal sign. Equals, for Boston, it's this cell, B2, over, divided by this one, C2, and that gives me salary over cost for that cell. One thing that was shown in the Excel videos is how to drag a formula down. So if I've put this formula in here, and it's referencing these two cells, I want this one to reference the fraction of these two cells, and this one to reference the fraction of these two cells. So I can copy that formula down by, once there's a formula in this cell, there's this little box in the corner. I put my mouse over it until it changes into that just fine line X instead of cross, instead of the wider white cross. And then I just drag that down and it'll copy that formula down. So the formula here was B3 over C3, the formula here is B4 over C4, so it copied that pattern of the formula down. This is something covered in the Excel videos that you should learn how to do, especially if you're going to go to a company where you're going to look at large lines of data and you want to copy the same formula over and over again. You don't have to keep typing it. It's a way to pull it down and copy it. So we have salary over cost. I'm just going to highlight this because this is a number we're going to look at a little more. So I'm going to do a light fill in this cell of just a little bit of gray so we can talk about it. Salary over cost. So what does this number mean, and why is it like this fraction that's less than 1? So if it costs you the same to live in a city as your salary was, this would be a number 1, salary over cost. If salary over cost is less than 1, it means it might cost a little more to live than what your salary is. And again, we're doing these on numbers of the lowest percentile of starting salaries and this other website that compares costs. So when you do this, you might get different job offer numbers for salaries, or you might be able to live more frugally than is calculated by this website. But this is just a starting point where I want you to look at data analysis. So I want you to make this column, make this spreadsheet just as I'm doing for your 3 cities, to do a salary over cost, and you'll get some entity that's a fraction or up to 1, or it might be even more than 1 if it costs less to live in your city than your starting salary is. So it should be somewhere, from 0 to 1 to maybe to 2, but not anything outside of those bounds. 2 would be it costs half as much to live there as you make starting out. That's probably not realistic, so I think the most I'd see is like 1.5, but do the numbers, put the analysis in, and see what that salary to cost ratio is. So the numbers should look something like this, maybe a little over 1, depending on if it costs more to live than the starting salary is through these calculations we're doing. And remember what was in our Venn diagram. So we had money, and we're going to look at this salary over cost fraction as a way to look at money. So if this number is higher, the higher this number is, the better it is as far as being able to live off of the money that you make. If this number is lower, you're getting into a situation where you might not have enough money to live off of. So we wanted to make this fraction in a way that the higher number is better. And then the other things in the Venn diagram than money were work and happiness. So we're going to try to quantify these, and I want you to do this for yourself. So work and happiness. And we're going to relate these back to these cities. So in Boston, we need to give a number for work and a number for happiness. In Miami, or whatever your second city is, a number for work, a number for happiness. And in Tampa, a number for work and a number for happiness. And we're going to also gray these in just because this is all going to be a similar pool of data that we're comparing. So work, happiness. One thing that was shown in the Excel videos that I'm just going to do now is to draw borders around some of these cells, because when you do this gray fill, it gets a little hard to see where you're working. So I'm just going to highlight all these cells and go to this tool here that can do different kinds of borders. And I'm going to do all borders. I like the way this looks because it breaks it out into a clear black line around each cell that I'm working on, and you can clearly see which dimensions you are on in the X and Y coordinates. So work and happiness. So what I want you to do for each of these, and we'll start with work, remember what we defined work as. The Venn diagram of happiness or contentment is, as far as work goes, do you like the work you do? Are you engaged in that job? Is it a career you really want to do? This is going to be hard to do without interviewing at places yet, but I want you to do a little research on which companies are in these cities, which ones you think you'd be happiest at, middle happy, and least happy at, as far as those cities go, based on the type of works and maybe the number of opportunities there are for jobs in those cities. So for work, you're going to put a number in here, and this number should be a maximum of the number 1 and maybe go down in that fractional number from there. So I'm going to say, oh, there's some awesome job in Boston. This would be the best job I could have. Or there's so many companies in there, I could find one I really want to work at. So if this is your highest ranking of the cities, give it a 1. Then look at the other cities and kind of gauge from there what you think your work fraction would be, based on maybe the number of companies to work for, the types of work that are there. And I'm just going to put numbers in there based on my own analysis of my career field. So I think in Miami, there's a lot of interesting engineering jobs. Not as many cool jobs maybe as Boston, but I'm going to give it a 0.7. It's up there, but not all the way up at 1. And let's say for Tampa, there's not as many companies to work for, and it's not quite the career field I want to be, but there are some cool engineering jobs. So I'm going to give that a 0.5. So give it somewhere in the range of like 0.5 to 1 and try to rank them in there. It could be a 0.7, a 0.8. This is, again, a very personal assignment, so do your own assessment on this. But give it somewhere from 0.5-ish to a 1-ish and rank them in there of those 3 cities you select for what you think you'd be contentment and fulfillment and excitement about work in those areas. Now, happiness, remember, was a different factor. Happiness goes to, I have family living in that area. I want to be close to that extended family. I want to live by the ocean. I really want to be in the ocean. I don't like snow. I don't want to live up north where there's snow. Or maybe you do. Maybe you like winter sports and snowboarding and skiing and you want to go up there. The happiness factor is more personal happiness or your partner or spouse's happiness. You're going to give it a similar ranking to work of something probably between 0.5 and 1 is the maximum. 1 would be, I'd be super happy living there. So you're going to have to give this a happiness factor ranking. And I went through and did this just on my own assessment. I gave Boston like a 0.7 because there's a lot of fun stuff to do there, but I don't like the cold personally. So it was okay. It was up there. Miami, not cold. Give it a little better than Boston. But it's a little too crowded for my personal taste. It's a little too big of a city for me. So for Tampa, I gave it a 1 because I have family there, extended family there, and it would be the best place for me to live. But there's, again, that's not just everything is that happiness factor. So do a similar thing for happiness, talk through it for yourself, and give those things factors between 0.5 and 1. So we have salary, work, happiness, and those were the entities in that Venn diagram of happiness. And what I want you to do from here is go through and start to look at this data and compare this data. So remember the Venn diagram of happiness was that money factor, that salary versus cost, that work, and that happiness, and then there's kind of all of them combined. So what is the total of the factors? So we'll do a total of factors. I'm going to shade this guy in just a slightly different color because it's not the same thing. This is going to be a sum or a total of those factors. I'll also give this guy that same all borders outline. So money, work, and happiness, and then a total of those factors. So what I want you to do for the total of the factors is add them up. And add up the money entity, which is our salary over cost, the work entity, and the happiness entity. We're not actually adding these money columns themselves, but these guys in the gray here that are those numbers that are hovering either some fraction below 1 up to 1, and with the salary over cost it might go slightly over 1. And in all these things, the larger the number they were, the better in our Venn diagram of happiness. So when we add them all up together, the larger the total number is, the better. So total of factors, we're going to add them up. And notice you can add left to right. You don't just have to add up and down. So I'll show you how to do this. So for the total of factors, we're going to, again, just enter a formula equals sum of salary over cost, my work, and my happiness for Boston. So for Boston, my total of factors makes about a 2.48. And then we're going to do the same thing for these two cells. So you can say equals sum of these 3 entities for Miami. Remember, that's a 2.065. Remember, another way to do it, instead of typing in sum of those 3 entities again, is to drag this down to drag the formula down. And that dragged down the equation, saying it's the sum of D4, E4, and F4. And so I have this total of factors, and this total of factors says Boston scored a 2.48, Miami scored a 2.065, and Tampa scored a 2.41. It's a number, but it starts to give a numerical ranking when you talk through the factors that you're adding in for money, which is salary over cost, work, and happiness. And this might be hard to do. It might really be hard to put numbers on it, but at least it's something you can look at comparatively to rank it out. So I'm going to stop the video here for now. This is the spreadsheet you're going to make up to this to get those factors in of the Venn diagram of happiness, of money as our salary over cost. In a non-dimensional form, we divided those things out, so it's kind of a number hovering around 1. Work and happiness, which are numbers you're going to have to put on there, where 1 would be your best job, career ever, and happiness would be the place you want to live most, and then fraction it down to there in relative order of those 3 cities you're thinking about starting your career in, and then the total of factors. I'm going to stop this video now. In the next video, we're going to go through and graph some of this data as the last part of your assignment to do a visual comparison and how to make the graphs look in similar titles and scales to do thoughtful comparison of data that is clearly represents the same entities. So we're going to stop this here, go through and do this part, and then we'll go to the next video for making the graphs from there. All right, guys.